Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight at this workshop sponsored by the Mental Health for Activists. Before I turn the mic over to our presenters, let me share with you information about upcoming activities. This is D. Miles, and I work with the Working Class Project and the National Education Commission. So our upcoming activity beginning January 21st and running through February 15th is a national Marxist school online. We hope that you have seen the invitation. We hope that you have signed up. It's a series of 15 or more classes where we will explore a number of different topics toward upgrading our ability to understand the society in which we live, as well as respond to struggle, growing our ability to be scientists in struggle, pursuing struggle from a scientific point of view. So if you have not seen the invitation, please go online at cpusa.org and sign up for the newsletter so that you will begin to receive the emails that have been distributed for a few weeks now concerning the National School. Again, the 2025 National Marxist School online will run from January 21st through February 15th. And we hope everyone will invite their club members, district members, contacts, friends, and family to join in as an aspect of our effort to resist the developments that are taking place in our society. All right, so with no further delay, I will turn the mic over to our first presenter. Paul, you have the floor.
Okay, cool. So, this Alienation, Marx's Conception of Man in a Capitalist Society by Bertell, Ollman. So Happy New Year, everybody. Thank you for allowing me to present on this topic. I am a mental health clinician in South Los Angeles. So though the reading was very weighty and at times very challenging for me to understand, what I found helpful in my assessment of the reading is to compare it and kind of contrast it to, my profession and my personal experience. And that's what this presentation is going to basically be about. I'll go to the next slide. Here's a little video. It's very, very short, which kind of goes and gives a brief summary of alienation in Marx. So today we're going to have a very agenda, an introduction to alienation, different forms of alienation, strategies to cope with alienation, and final tips and takeaways. First question is, what is alienation? It's one is a subjective alienation, which is when human individuals feel estranged or do not feel at home in the modern social world. Marx had said it's a theoretical basis of alienation is that a worker invariably loses the ability to determine life and destiny when deprived of the right to think or conceive of themselves as a director of their own actions, to determine the character of these actions, and to define relationships with other people, and to own those items of value from goods and services produced by their own labor. And like I said, as a mental health clinician and someone employed in corporate America, these specific stimuli, they can be seen in things like worker dissatisfaction, anxiety, depression, and which is a real reality, decreased lifespans and chronic, mental health conditions or chronic health conditions, but it's, like I said, anxiety, depression, diabetes, and the like. And going forward, what is alienation? There's also objective alienation. And this, by contrast, makes no references to the beliefs or feelings of human beings, but that human beings are objectively alienated when they're hindered from developing their human capacities. And again, this relates in real life to high turnover rates, low employee morale, a lacking value or meaning, or no value in human capacities, i.e. stress. Back in the 40s or 50s, like when my parents were, coming up, it was not unknown for folk to, even die in a job. But nowadays, folk might work at a place for 2 years, maybe a year, and they bounce, to look for better pay, better options, and better opportunities. And that's due to, certain working conditions. So there's different types of alienation. There's alienation from the products of labor. You see little folk over there, they're at in an assembly line. Looks like they're making little hubcaps for a car. And workers in this instance, they feel separated from, in that they have no ownership over goods produced. It's repetitive tasks with little control over the final product. Back in the day, workmen, they basically started from the beginning to the end. They had an intimate connection with the items that they produce, and there was value in the time and the efforts. Whereas now, the items that you're producing through your work and sweat, they belong to the workers and those to the owners, and they receive the profit of that work. This can manifest in the human or the mental components, and reduce self-esteem, decrease motivation, or decrease performance. Folk are on autopilot. Folk are less inclined to really, care about what they're doing because there's no direct input or investment in the items that they're producing. And also with those repetitive tasks, it also there's a correlation with, those injuries at the work or on the job. The next form of alienation is from the process of labor. Instead of having the freedom to choose how and when they work, workers under a capitalist system must work as and when their employer requires. There's no control or autonomy, no personal or emotional connection to the work product, as we talked about earlier. And this manifests in real life as depression, burnout and anxiety, and which can also correlate to, a shorter lifespan and significant chronic conditions. And I'll get back to that at the end. And there's also alienation from self, which is really, really major and something that's really manifested in, the American economy and the American worker, particularly post-COVID-19, where people were isolated for, a year. Folk are now starting to engage mental health supports. And this is about, loss of self-identity and purpose within work, minimal feelings of self-fulfillment, depression, and again, it's no control of the goods produced in the market. And according to Marx, satisfying work is an essential part of being a human being. And now with AI or robots, there's a disconnect, and a lot of folk are going to be losing their jobs. So this is going to actually be a major component in the new economy, and presumably the next administration as well. And then the next one is alienation from other workers. Workers are encouraged to compete for finite resources, jobs, salaries, status. Workers lose the right to determine their own direction. They're fighting against, their self-interest. There's decreased organizational structure, also decreased job satisfaction and employee conflicts. You're pitting, one another, pitting other employees against other employees, as opposed to working together to collectively organize to, fight a collective struggle to improve, your standards, and to raise, salaries, and also outcomes of those that you support. And that can be seen now with collective bargaining, at the Starbucks, at the Amazon, where workers are coming together and saying, no, we are a team. Or like in the Soul Food movie, when Big Mama said, you might got five fingers, but when they're together, you could, make a mighty blow. And with that said, it's just working together, coming together, and not being in a rat race and, not making any money. So because this is about, mental well-being and mental health, and, I come from that field, there's certain strategies to cope with a hostile work environment. And as I mentioned earlier, those stressors, in order to maximize your own, life, your lifespan, and also your health. It's always important to, incorporate certain techniques. One thing that I, really push with my clients is breathing exercises. It's something you can do independently or collectively in your car, before you wake up in the morning, or before you start your day, or even during your day when you're stressed out. There's different ways to just kind of control your breathing, which will minimize or decrease your heart rate and, take away some of the anxiety. Also accessing mental health supports. There is a lot of stigma, particularly with people of color who are less inclined to receive those supports or engage those supports. I'm from LA, so, it's always kind of a status symbol. So I got a therapist, but a lot of places outside of here, that's not really the norm. So hopefully people will be more inclined, particularly in this setting, in this group, to, access those supports, because they can be a lifeline. There's also a correlation between nutrition and diet. What you eat, and they used to say, you are what you eat. If you're eating foods that are high in processed fats, and, cholesterol and just, dirty foods, it catches up to you. It can impact your mood, impact your health. And like I said earlier, it can also impact your lifespan. Also sleep. Sleep is very, very important for your mental health, for your cognitive development, and for your life. It helps you to kind of reset your mind and, works with digestion. And that's one thing I tell my clients, when they're up for 3 and 4 days, some have, drug challenges, but also some have, mental challenges. And when they do sleep, I do notice a correlation with improved mood, improved affect, and a decrease in what they call maladaptive behaviors. And there's also community and social integration. Having community is really, really important. There's a link between folk who are particularly like older folk, when they're a part of community or they feel a sense of community, whether it's with families, with church organizations or civic organizations or community organizations. It just kind of helps you to improve your mood, again, your affect, and it also helps to decrease incidence of like Alzheimer's and other, cognitive, illnesses. And going to community integration and organization, that goes to unions. You going to your boss asking for a raise individually looks like you're begging. But when you go collectively as a group and negotiate, you're negotiating. You are asking or demanding a better, working environment for yourself and those that you, work with. And then lastly is a work-life balance. When it's quitting time, you quit. Cut that phone off, go home, mind your business, and cut it off. As a therapist, a lot of times I would take work home with me. And like for myself personally, I walk about 2 miles a day. I meditate, I burn incense, I journal, and I also myself access mental health supports because, I don't want that trauma to not be processed and, to latch onto me. So those are some strategies that are like real life strategies that you can utilize to improve your life, to improve your health, improve your community, and to cope with.
It looks like Paul's computer has frozen. I think his last sentence was to cope with the challenges of capitalist reality. All right, so thank you, Paul. Let's move on to our next presenter very quickly. Our next presenter, Eric, you have the mic.
All right. Thank you, Paul. It's really helpful to hear about alienation and how it plays out from somebody who works in the mental health field. Now, hi, everyone. I'm Eric Gersowitz. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm a member of the Los Angeles Metro Club of Communist Party USA. This book is called Alienation, Marx's Conception of Man in Capitalist Society. And before I begin, I want to point out 2 things about the title. First, I think we'd be better off saying Marx's conception of people in capitalist society. The number of times per page Ollman refers to people as man and men is noticeable, and I think it's important that we notice things like this. It's an example of how even language, through its historical development, takes on characteristics of ruling class ideas like male supremacy. Another thing worth noticing about the title is that this is a breakdown of Marx's conception of people specifically in capitalist society. And this is helpful to us because it demonstrates how our conception of people, just like our conception of everything else, is constantly evolving and taking on its particular form within the history of class struggle. Nothing is static throughout time. Marxism does not present a fixed conception of humanity or a human nature which stands outside of class struggle. And finally, I want to say, as Ollman points out briefly at the end of this book, that readers of Marx come away with differing conclusions about some of the topics I'll be covering in this presentation, including concepts like interrelations, as well as whether or not Marx broke away from his theory of alienation later in his career as his own ideas developed. Rather than getting into the weeds, I am going to approach my presentation with what I think we can use right now to make us more effective contributors to working class struggle. And so if I had to choose just one word to sum up Ollman's book, it would be interrelations. Ollman describes how Marx understands everything from nature to the ideas and social structures that arise from nature as interrelated. So everything is interrelated. And we're talking about the scientific sense in which everything is interrelated. And I think it's important that we stay grounded in using this concept practically for the purpose of better understanding capitalism and our position within it, and not to reduce interrelations to like a form of pop spirituality. And because everything is interrelated, nothing can truly be understood in isolation from the whole process. This is because, objectively, social structures cannot exist in isolation from the whole process. I think if we can develop our understanding of interrelations, it can be incredibly helpful to our effectiveness as organizers and also to our mental well-being. As Marxists, we analyze our world materially, meaning scientifically. When we talk about material reality, we are referring to nature. And when we say that we are materialists, we mean that we understand scientifically that everything arises from nature, from matter, or from material reality. Nothing can arise from outside of nature. Even you and I and everyone attending this webinar, and everyone who forgot to attend this webinar and who's watching on YouTube now, all of us are part of material reality. Marx was mostly looking at the social structures which arise from nature, or matter, or material reality. And Marx's work reveals how nature is at the very same time shaped by these social structures which arise from nature. So you, me, the motion of cells in our brains, our thoughts, ideas, social structures, the economy, class struggle, technology, and everything else arise from nature and are a part of nature because everything is interrelated. When we say as Marxists that ideas and social structures simultaneously shape material reality, it's not because we see ideas and social structures as arising from some mystical, non-scientific realm outside of material reality. We use different forms of science to understand our world at different scales. At the atomic and subatomic levels, we use chemistry and physics and quantum physics. We don't have the technology, at least not yet, to use just the laws of physics to predict the future state of social structures. And so we can use a Marxist analysis to better understand the social structures which emerge from nature, to make projections about them, and even more importantly, to figure out how to engage in the process of changing them. Again, we're interested in this concept for its concrete and practical use to the working class. Because everything is interrelated, Ollman argues that to even think about, let alone to write about or speak about the interrelated whole process requires artificially isolating individual entities within the whole. Marx calls this process of isolating entities for the purpose of understanding the whole abstractions. For example, if we want to understand labor or value or class struggle, we treat these concepts while we're analyzing them as if they are separate entities, even though in reality they are interrelated with one another and with the whole process of capitalism. Ollman writes, quote, "An abstraction is a part of the whole whose ties with the rest are not apparent. It is a part which appears to be a whole in itself. According to Marx, To hold that the world is actually composed of such abstractions is evidence of alienation. So that brings us to the question, what is alienation? You and I might have our own pre-existing understandings of this word, but when we as Marxists talk about alienation, we mean the very objective ways in which capitalism, as well as previous class societies from slave societies to feudal societies, mask interrelations from us. One of the many ways I think this plays out today is through capitalism's constant promotion of the idea that each of us possesses a free will, meaning the suggestion that our brains and the neurons in our brains can somehow operate independently of the physical, scientific process happening within them. We may become convinced that you or I or our brains or that clever idea we came up with at midnight somehow exists independently of nature, as if we can sit down and with enough of this thing called willpower, cause the physics or the laws of motion happening in our brains, which give rise to thoughts, to happen differently. I think this admittedly convincing construct is an example of our alienation, of our viewing ourselves as separate entities from nature. And as disconcerting as it might feel under capitalism to lose this sense of individual control, I don't think it's helpful to advancing our objective understanding of interrelations. Also, as a result of alienation, we may become convinced that products which arise from class society have an independent existence with powers of their own and needs of their own outside of the interrelated whole. Marx calls this component of alienation fetishization. We might fetishize the market or the products which the working class produces, or the machines workers make and capitalists buy, and then which workers use to make more products for capitalists to sell. Ollman gives an example of fetishization by pointing to the belief that it is money itself which somehow has the inherent ability to create more money or interest. I remember as a little kid getting a kid's savings account at the bank. I think it was billed as a way to teach kids how banks and money work. And you got to join the Thumb Buddy Club. The mascot was a thumb, and you could get prizes, I think like fanny packs or something. I was told that when I deposited money into my savings account, the bank would borrow my money and use it to make more money. And so the money in my account would grow a little bit through this newly created money or interest. And I remember imagining that the bank would put the very bills and coins I gave them into a collective pot, which would, through some sort of physical process, cause those bills and coins to replicate over time into more bills and coins. Fetishization is a component of alienation under capitalism. Class society, in this case capitalism, creates real confusion about how and why it functions. I'd be interested to hear in the discussion segment examples of how capitalism has alienated you from understanding how capitalism actually works. As a result of fetishization, of believing that the products of capitalism have independent existences of their own with needs, powers, and control over the whole, capitalism's products actually start to take on the power and control which we believe them to have. The working class might find itself placing the blame for its suffering on these fetishized entities rather than on capitalism itself, as if, for example, the suffering of office workers is ultimately the fault of old, rickety office chairs. Fetishization as a component of alienation, and alienation in all its forms, is useful to capitalism. When we do not have a scientific understanding of interrelations, the working class, which Marx understood scientifically to be the revolutionary class under capitalism, cannot be as effective in building the mass movement necessary to advance society from capitalism into socialism. I want to highlight one more area of the interrelated whole, which I think is extremely tempting to view as separate, and that is even our conception of morality, things like good, bad, right, and wrong. Ethics take on different forms depending on our position within the history of class struggle. In capitalism, all members of the working class must be paid less than the value their labor produces. The portion of value that workers' labor produces, and which is not paid to the worker as wages and salaries, is what we call surplus value. This unpaid value generated by workers, this surplus value, goes to the capitalists to either pocket for themselves or to reinvest in the process of extracting more surplus value from workers. Paying workers less than the value their labor produces is what we as Marxists call exploitation, and all workers under capitalism must be exploited. Today, right now, from a working class perspective, exploitation is bad and wrong. At the same time, today, right now, from a capitalist class perspective, exploitation is good and right. Neither of these perspectives is an eternal truth. It's just how capitalism functions. And we may find ourselves within capitalism as either workers or capitalists. Even our ethics are just a result of class struggle, which is itself a result of the interrelated whole process arising from nature. Ollman describes how if we approach Marxism from the perspective of ethics, it becomes incredibly easy for the capitalist class to simply refute working class morality by claiming that capitalism is more moral. Maybe you've even heard capitalists or capitalism's proponents make this sort of argument today. Ollman writes, quote, "As with any misnomer in the human sciences, Marxist ethics is not without its ideological consequences. For to accept that Marxism either is or contains an ethic, to admit that Marx operated from fixed principles, whatever content one gives them, is to put Marx on the same logical plane as his opponents. It is to suggest that Marx, for all his effort at historical explanation, and despite his explicit denial, criticized them because he favored different principles, in which case the capitalist ideologist easily removes the noose Marx has placed around his neck by the simple device of rejecting what passes for the latter's principles." Marx didn't decide to support working class interests because they best fit his principles. Instead, as an observer trying to understand our world scientifically, he found the working class, objectively, to be the revolutionary class under capitalism. Ollman continues, quote, "Attributing an ethic to Marxism inevitably serves the ends of the bourgeoisie. This is the real danger, for example, in espousing Marxist humanism, quite apart from its dubious standing as a scientific concept," end quote. Maybe some of this can sound a little academic or even heartless. How is it useful to us right now to understand that even our ethics and even the concept of free will are simply temporary, passing ideas born out of class struggle? When we understand class struggle and the position of the working class within class struggle more objectively, we can become more effective in organizing to change the conditions which do not serve the interests of most people, of the working class. Those conditions which constantly attack workers and oppress people and make us feel isolated and disgusted. We can also let go, at least a little bit, of some of the stress that can come along with seeing individual people we interact with day to day as either good or bad, and focus our energy on building mass working class consciousness. I admit this is much easier said than done. It really, really hurts when the people we're interacting with, maybe people we are close with, for one reason or another, are not impassioned by working class politics or working class ethics, or who adopt capitalist ideology as their own. Capitalism is very effective at convincing us that there must still be at least a little validity to viewing class struggle through the lens of good versus evil. And working within this framework, it can become all-consuming to make sure we're the good ones, and then to make sure everyone knows we're the good ones. When we begin to analyze things more objectively, we can understand why the working class feels the way it does under capitalism. For example, why the working class, broadly speaking, might feel exhausted and angry, why we might feel used for someone else's gain, and why we might feel profoundly disconnected from or disinterested in capitalist society and all of the products our labor produces, even though our labor produced those products. In other words, we can understand our own alienation, which is not at all a vague or morals-based or subjective judgment, but a concrete, scientific, objective reality which affects the working class in a particular way. When we understand things more objectively, we can better grasp why fascist leaders and movements like Trump and MAGA are growing, how they serve the interests of a particular segment of the capitalist class, and how they're able to infect even members of the working class with capitalist ideology, including such ideological poisons as white supremacy and male supremacy and transphobia and national chauvinism. And when we understand interrelations more objectively, we can better grasp our interest as the working class in struggling against the proliferation of these ideological poisons. But wait a second, if this is all just a material scientific process playing out, and if even you and I are just a part of that material process, if we've even let go of the capitalist concept of our own free will, shouldn't we conclude that we can just sit back, relax, and not do anything while the process plays out, however it plays out? Well, as Marxists, we know that the working class does not have the luxury under capitalism to sit back and relax. the working class includes everyone who must make their living from wages and salaries. Workers do not own or control the products of their labor, and workers are separated from experiencing all of the fruits of their labor. In other words, the working class, the vast majority of people, do not have ownership of or control over the world it builds. This too is what Marx is referring to when he discusses alienation and its particular effect on the working class. As a result, the working class under capitalism is stressed and certainly doesn't have the luxury to sit back and relax. So, if we want to put an end to the distressing conditions in which we find ourselves, we have to organize. And if we want to succeed in our organizing, we need to organize in a mass way and in a unified way. The fact that mass movements don't happen because of individual free will is only a letdown within the context of capitalism. A more scientific analysis helps us focus our justified rage in the same direction and makes this justified rage useful to the entire multiracial, multinational, multigender, multi-generational working class. If we continue to strengthen our scientific analysis of interrelations, we can make sure we're even better situated and unified in our capacity to defeat MAGA and Trump and to continue our work to realize an exciting, vibrant, optimistic, technologically advanced, socialist future. Thank you very much. And now I would like to turn the mic over to Molly. So, Molly.
Thank you, Eric.
Okay. So again, my name is Molly Nagan, and I'll be presenting on how capitalism, through the process of alienation, contributes to mental health challenges. I will be using Bertell Ollman's text as a source. And this presentation it was influenced by members of my club in Cleveland, as well as members of the Mental Health for Activists Collective. When we talk about the mental health challenges that we're facing, we're talking about experiences of loss of connection, loss of belonging, increased levels of antagonism with other members of our class, loss of control, feeling abandoned at the mercy of larger systems, and thought distortions where subjectivity is dominant. People are engaged in black or white thinking, personalizing, and often I'll hear people say that they don't think objectivity exists. So in this presentation, I'm going to use Bertell Ollman's book and apply Marxist theories to explain why these mental states are so toxic for us. First of all, Marx understands, as Eric talked about, relations as the basic unit of reality. And if our relations in capitalism are alienated, then we're going to experience alienation as a dominant experience of being human. So alienation redefines our human nature under capitalism. And then lastly, I will talk about how the communist movement can help us navigate these challenges. One of Marx's favorite quotes is said to be, "Nothing human is alien to me," by Terence, a Roman playwright from 195 BCE. And this quote really gets at the crux of how Marx views reality as a set of relations, that relations is the basic unit. So none of our identities are actually fixed. What we see, our experiences, what we encounter is integrated into our being, and our being is expressed outside of itself as, you know, and then integrated into the beings of others. So this constant interweb of experience, and our identity actually is really about how we're related to each other, to our conditions. In a class society, it means our class position. And it also has to do with what we do that changes our conditions and influences the beings outside of us. And likewise with identity, also our ideas are expressions of our conditions in our drive to change those conditions. They're not inherently good or bad, moral or immoral. A capitalist could say that, you know, he prefers capitalism over communism, but Marx says that's not really a preference, that is an expression of his class position in a class in capitalist society. And likewise, working class people are inherently oppositional to the capitalist class. The contradiction of capitalism means that that we live in a class struggle as working class people. And communist ideas, therefore, are not moral, or of course they're not immoral, but that they're reflections of that existing class struggle. This is, I think, as Eric pointed out, really a helpful reminder, because sometimes communist ideas can lead to dead ends. There can be mistakes. And really what we're doing is we're consciously experimenting in the social process, and we learn from those mistakes and we apply those lessons to chart the path forward. So again, communists are not good, they're not bad. We have ideas that are expressions of our class struggle that we're applying to move it forward. And one of the things that to keep in mind is even the facts that we understand, that we value some facts over other facts because of our conditions, because of our class position. In a capitalist system, our awareness of some facts, the ability to discover some facts is limited by what is profitable for the capitalist class. So all of this together goes to show that something as something that seems as fixed as facts, as our ideas, as our identity, are not fixed at all. They're interrelated with our conditions, with our historical process. So when you think about that as the kind of basis for reality, now we start to look into what is it like under capitalism. So alienation is this process under capitalism that is kind of like a poison in all of our relations. And that's because the ruling ideas of every epoch are always the ideas of the ruling class. There's human nature that is kind of prehistoric, prehistory, what is our like species nature, but then there's also like how the mode of production that we're in shapes us. So alienation, again, it's not a personal, emotional problem, it's an objective process. And what this presentation is really trying to do, and this analysis, is to help us to name it so that we can deal with it. But under capitalism, human beings, we don't know ourselves as social beings as so much, where we are engaged in mutual cooperation. It's more so that we see ourselves as private competing entities. Bertell Ollman says it is as an anarchistic galaxy of selfish worlds. There's no universal cooperative community which unites everyone on the planet, so people are siphoned off into these partial communities that are based on shared antagonisms. And it really reduces our experience of what it means to be human. Under capitalism, human nature is defined by the drive toward ownership. We experience an alienation from species, from the earth. It's about one-sided gratification, the sense of possessing objects. It's a society based on private property, where respect for other species, their homes, our ecosystem is not really valued. It's just really what works for isolated individuals, particularly in the ruling class. And that means that human beings become abstractions from the natural world. Capitalism even makes land, water, food a commodity. It puts a price on natural expressions of life. And it's only through this process of alienation that there could be a price on something that is not produced by labor. You kind of step back for a moment and think about how we're all just floating in a universe, but somehow someone put a price on that. It doesn't make any sense. In the grind of being a worker, we also are losing ourselves, our humanity. We sell ourselves to survive, work like a machine on a machine, and we have to feed on the products of other people who are also selling themselves to survive. So it's this alienating, dehumanizing process. As a producer, we're told when, where, and how to work. We're told what to buy, how to use it. And what remains to us, where we can try to feel like our most human, is really what is not unique to us as humans at all. It's our animal nature, you know, eating, drinking, having sex, sleeping. We take a lunch break at work to feel human. We eat a sandwich and think, wow, I can be myself instead of a worker. And then capitalism manufactures needs, where articles of consumption develop a power over us, such as money. We need money to live, and so then money becomes this powerful entity. Products develop a social character, and then people become reduced to resources. Capitalism even calls us human resources. So we live in this world where alienated labor is embodied in all of its products, but then we start to see those products as things instead of as relationships. Capitalism makes it seem like that relations are not underlying every product in our economy. This internal connection back to labor is obscured. And this reality even controls capitalists, who have become dehumanized by their rivalry with other capitalists. It's drummed into them as children, where the movement of the world market becomes taken as natural law. If a capitalist tries to counter the demands of the market, other capitalists will simply supplant them. And again, individual changes cannot change the system. We have the experience of loss of control. And then as citizens of a state or members of a community, the reality is, like, whenever we relate with one another, no matter what we do or want, we are actually engaging in politics. But under capitalism, the state appears largely separate from the context of this daily political activity. The state is where politics happen. And then the politics, the political relations there, they don't address human needs. They are for the satisfaction of the ruling class. And people will say, I don't do politics. People think politics don't affect their daily lives. Close to 90 million people don't vote. Eligible voters did not vote this election. But we have to understand that consciously that not engaging in the election is still a political act. It's an alienated political act. And on the flip side, people will literally vote for a billionaire, our class enemy, by the millions, where candidates in capitalism become this abstract figurehead whose class nature is completely obscured, and our politics is not a reflection. It doesn't at least appear as a reflection of class struggle. So this understanding of dehumanization, Marx never considered as complete. He always said it was, almost complete, that there is always this potential to become fully human. Again, alienation, it's not an emotional or personal problem or something that we can individually fix. It's an objective process, historical process, that through class struggle we can address. And this communist theory is very critical for helping us to do so. So the role of the communist movement is critical for addressing these mental health challenges and freeing working class people from alienation. The goal of communism is to allow people to become fully human, to fulfill our human potential. And contrary to capitalist propaganda, it's actually the whole realization of individuality. So individuality, again, defined by our relations. Communism develops when concern for the community replaces the demands of the isolated individual. When individual needs become social needs and cooperation is dominant, conflict becomes viewed as a difference, a valuable difference. And so socialist appropriation of the means of production involves much more than transferring titles of ownership. The goal of the socialist state is to humanize everything. Our current reality of this inhuman existence of alienation is the condition for a revolutionary response. So in our organizing work, we can contribute by developing collectivity in this class struggle, to notice when we are experiencing antagonism with other members of our class, or engaged in thought distortion, subjectivity, and to try to remain objective, to step back and ask ourselves, why is this behavior or thinking a product of our capitalist system? To approach the project of social change by showing people when what they've done is different than what they think, than what they they have said results from or functions other than what they know, that there's that people are defined by our relations, and capitalism distorts even the evaluation of facts. So returning to this objective analysis over and over again and providing a new understanding and leading to new action. So our Marxist science of social change can help us understand why these mental health challenges are so toxic for people. It goes against nature, not even just human nature, but nature itself, and how alienation works to redefine human nature over time. And lastly, how the communist movement is critical in making a difference in our class, in the people's lives. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Molly. Beautiful painting there. All right, we'll open the floor we have a few more minutes. We'll open the floor for questions and comments. Our format is we'll take all questions and comments, or a series of questions and comments, and then we'll go back to each of the presenters for a few minutes, and they can respond to whichever question or comment they choose, able to provide a response. All right, so I'm looking for raised hands. Stefan, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly.
Hello there, it's Stefan, by the way, but no worries. Phenomenal presentations, every one of you. These were really, really rich. I had a question. I think it could be to anybody, but maybe actually more particularly for Paul, speaking in kind of a corporate setting. It's very clear how pervasive alienation is in our society. I think it's one of the reasons we struggle even building our party. So I'm wondering how you address alienation in dealing with people who aren't already kind of on our side politically.
Thank you, Stefan. Let us collect all of the comments and all of the questions, and then each of the panelists will have an opportunity to respond and summarize very briefly. Okay, CK.
Oh, hi. So yeah, really great presentations. I was a little late, but I loved everything about what I heard. And I was wondering if anyone has ideas for how to deal with when we talk about alienation and separateness, like, groups that kind of like won't meld with others. Like I deal with like a lot of people who are like singing about Ukraine and, oh, the poor people of Ukraine. And I'm like, well, what about Palestine? And they don't seem to be able to get off of the kind of mainstream narrative that somehow Ukraine is like the one that's suffering, like they have a genocide, like they don't know anything about the coup, the U.S. coup of the government of Ukraine, they seem like they call themselves progressives, like they sing anti-war music, So there seems to be this division in the movement between people who call themselves progressives or anti-war, and I don't really know how to bridge that gap. Like when we talk about, like there is a sense of alienation in that. I hope my question was coherent and makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Looking for maybe one or two other raised hands. Okay, Jacob, your mic is open.
Yeah, so I was specifically curious about the question of like organizing in the imperial core and like the cognitive dissonance of that. And like how we can kind of deal with like effectively organizing, like the the specific contradictions inherent to organizing within the imperial core and how that manifests like in terms of mental health for organizers.
Okay, thank you, Jacob. Okay, so now we'll turn the mic back over to each of our panelists very briefly. So let's start with Paul.
Yeah. So I guess in response to the question related to how folk can ally in face with alienation, it's very, very interesting when preparing for this presentation. I kind of analyzed my own work environment and some of the challenges that we face as clinicians, case managers, peer navigators, throughout the entire gamut. And what I recognize is that we are, if we collectively organize and we, work together, we can really improve our salaries, improve patient care. We are in an underserved community, South Los Angeles, so there's a lack of resources for, a lot of those who we support. So number one is political engagement, social engagement, and also just communication within each other. Each one teach one. I guess that construct would really maximize our abilities to want to organize, but then also to support. So I guess foundationally, it's just organization and just participation, whether it's politically, just there's a lot of nonprofits here in the city, and then foundationally, just knowing how to treat. Well, I guess just education in this. Well, I'm sorry, there's a lot going on in my background here. I had a brain fart, but that's basically my point right there. So yeah.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Thank you very much. And now we'll go to Eric.
Okay. Yes, thank you, everybody, for the questions and comments. I wanted to, I think the general theme of my responses will be about mass movements and building mass movements, but I wanted to first of all respond to Stefan and CK, who had, I think, sort of similar questions with how to address people who aren't with us on all the issues. And I think it's a real challenge. It's really difficult for me to know how to have a conversation and not to have to feel like I have to be right and correct the record about everything, because invariably when we're talking with somebody who isn't a member of the Communist Party, there's going to be something that from our perspective they're not looking at materially or however it is. But I think we should be building within progressive movements, within mass progressive movements where the working class is right now. And when we're having those conversations with people who maybe are progressive on many issues or with us on many issues, over time, if they're a member of the working class, and if we're working in a way that's demonstrating that we're supportive of working class interests, I think people will come to see and find that our analysis is a correct analysis, and they may be willing more to engage on those things that are heavily propagandized within capitalism. And so similarly, I think with Jacob's question about organizing in the imperial core, and right now our club is focused on Cuba solidarity work, actually, and our district is as well, in getting Cuba off the state sponsors of terrorism list. And I think something that we've found is that previous work to get Cuba off the state sponsors of terrorism list is done by, in many cases, not in mass ways. And it's very difficult to figure out how to connect this issue in a way that resonates with, that people see the connection with working class struggle, that we're all part of the working class, and that when we remove Cuba from the state sponsor of terror list, this helps the international working class, and it's really important. And so again, our work there is to try to see if we can bring this issue into the mass progressive movements that already exist, mass progressive organizations who maybe haven't paid as much attention as they could or should to Cuba solidarity, and over time making it something that is that people see as related to their own personal struggle as a member of the working class. And I don't think there are any easy answers. I think it or like kind of quick solutions, they're just going to happen overnight. We have to build, and that in many cases is going to take years. We have to be willing to commit to that amount of time and not become too discouraged, even though capitalism can be, as we've all talked about today, incredibly discouraging because of the way that it affects the working class and alienates us.
All right, thank you, Eric. And now we will, Molly.
Thanks for the questions. I think that, to me, what I have learned through this struggle and being a part of the party is the practice of remaining objective. So when people when we say things like they're not on our side politically, there's a distortion there, because if they're in our class, then we have working class issues in common. And so when in this work, what we're doing is we're trying to check our antagonism, our emotions, our anger toward each other, and get back to, first of all, what we're all struggling with, find unity, and then go to the places, from this place of unity, go to the places where we have a different evaluation of the facts, as Marx put it, and try to again and again explain the point of view without it being about I'm good and you're bad, or there's something absurd or wrong with the fact that people may value Ukrainian lives, over Palestinian lives. It's wrong, don't get me wrong, but it is a product of capitalism that is happening. And so people understanding that capitalism is a poison that impacts people's outlook. That's to me just what I've been just really trying to bring myself to. It takes a lot of humility. It takes a lot of self-awareness to step back and try to reapproach that conversation in a persuasive way, without making it an us versus them, conflict. That struggle of bringing collective understanding and collectivity around, unity and being anti-racist and anti-capitalist, that is the work. That literally is what we're here to do. And to the last question, I think I think Eric talked about finding ways that our unique position in the United States, how we're leveraging that for the benefit of working class internationalism, how we're leveraging our position in imperialism as citizens of this country to benefit the whole class. I also think that it's important, to me at least, when we talked about alienation being in all of our products. So alienated labor is in all of our products. We're consuming products from the global South every day, and that is something that is present with us. It influences us. It's not separate from us. So the alienation and the exploitation and oppression that working class people are experiencing, no matter where they are, is something that we're connected to, even if we're in the imperialist core. So it alienates us when any part of our class is alienated. There's not really a distinction there. We're differently alienated, but we're all alienated.
Molly, your audio went out. Just very quickly, I'd like to add that in addition to, given the situation that we're in now, a great emphasis is being put on listening to what working class people have to say and looking for the ways to engage them in struggle based on their areas of interest based on the various levers that they will reveal, which would give us the opportunity to involve them and encourage them to become involved in struggle. So it's not just conversation; it's also activity and engagement in the fight back. And we're always looking for the levers to, in any way, involve people in struggle in the fight back. So thank you, Eric. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Molly, for doing the work to provide us with a look at alienation. I think you all revealed that it would be helpful if we continued to pursue the topic of alienation, trying to understand better and better how the reality of capitalism impacts us, but not just that, through better understanding how the reality of capitalism impacts us, also better understanding how we can involve masses in the fight back. So thank you, everyone. Happy New Year. Thank you so much for participating. We hope you will participate also in the National School. Have a good week. Have a good rest of your week. And thank you again. Good night.